The melody was Kazar's unthinkable. Vivienne Shaw froze instantly in the silent, polished corridor of Harrington Academy. It was well after 10 p.m., the atmosphere still and aseptic. Every pupil, every instructor had long since departed. The only expected sound was the faint drone of the building's climate control. But this was a piano. Her daughter's piano. She recognized Era's playing intrinsically technical, precise, yet always devoid of warmth, like a flawless automaton reciting notes. This was fundamentally different. The music drifting from the music room's open door was hesitant, delicate, and saturated with a sorrow so profound it made the air in the hallway feel oppressive. It was a sound Vivienne had never before heard her daughter produce. A flash of irritation tightened her jaw. She had left Era there 2 hours prior with a thermos of tea and her braille sheet music while she presided over a late-night emergency board meeting in the Nexus Innovate Conference Suda. A sleek, glass-walled annex her corporation had funded. The nanny had canceled last minute. A sick child of her own, compelling Vivienne to bring Era along. It wasn't ideal, but the music room was a controlled environment, safe, quiet. It was not, however, supposed to be occupied by anyone else. In service, if this unexpected act of gentle teaching resonates with you, the kind of quiet, genuine connection that changes everything, then you might find a home at Kindness Treasury. We seek out and share stories of the small, profound moments of humanity that truly matter. Subscribe to Kindness Treasury and help us shine a light on the people who make the world a little softer. She marched toward the light spilling into the hall, her heels clicking with sharp authority, ready to dismiss whoever had interrupted her daughter's practice. But as she reached the threshold, the scene within made the breath catch in her throat. There was Era, her blind daughter, seated at the grand piano. Her usual stiff, perfect posture was absent. Her shoulders were slackened, her head tilted as if listening to a confidentiality. But she wasn't alone. Seated beside her on the bench, his back partly to the door, was the E's custodian. He wore the school's plain gray maintenance uniform, his presence a stark dichotomy to the room's polished grandeur. He was whispering something, his voice a low, calming murmur. And as he spoke, Era played a chord that glimmered with a feeling Vivienne didn't know her daughter possessed. "Don't concentrate on the notes, Era," the man said gently. "Imagine a hue. What does that sound like to you? For me, this one. This one sounds like the gray of the sky right before it rains." Era's small fingers pressed the keys again, and the chord was softer this time, melancholic. "It's solitary," she whispered. "It can be," the janitor agreed. "But solitary isn't always mournful. Sometimes it's just tranquil waiting. Try the next one." Vivienne stood as petrified in the darkness of the hall, a powerful CEO reduced to an eavesdropper. She watched the man's large, work-roughened hand hover nearby, never making contact, but guiding her through his presence alone. He wasn't teaching her method. Her expensive, hand-picked instructors did that, drilling scales and timing into her until all the vitality was gone. This man was teaching her as emotion. He was translating music into a language of sensation and recollection, a language her daughter was fluent in. For a moment, Vivienne's instinct was to storm in, to reassert control, to demand an explanation. This was a violation of protocol, a security risk. But she remained riveted to the spot, held captive by the scene. She had spent a fortune on therapists, on specialists, on the best instructors in the nation, all in a desperate attempt to coax her withdrawn daughter out of her reclusiveness. She'd bought her the finest piano, enrolled her in the most distinguished school, and scheduled every minute of her life to nurture a talent that might grant her joy. Yet, nothing had succeeded. Era remained a beautiful, perfectly tuned instrument that no one knew how to play. And here was the janitor, a man whose name she didn't even know, says unveiling a part of her daughter's spirit she had never been permitted to see. "Now sense the wood under your fingers," he murmured. The keys are old. They've been played by hundreds of students. They contain stories. Can you feel them? Era nodded, her expression rapt. They're weary. He chuckled, a warm, authentic sound that seemed to envelop the vast room. They are. But they always have one more song in them. Just like people. Vivienne felt a strange, unwelcome twinge in her chest. She hadn't heard Era speak with such utter unfiltered sincerity in years. With her, every exchange was a careful negotiation, a minefield of unspoken rules. With this unknown man, her daughter was simply present. The lesson, if it could be termed that, persisted for another 10 minutes. He didn't rectify Era's errors. Instead, he'd ask her what a wrong note felt like. A surprise, she'd say, like a step that isn't there. And he'd nod, comprehending completely. Finally, he glanced at the large clock on the wall. All right, I think that's enough stories for one night. Your mom will be concluding her work soon. Will you be here tomorrow? Era asked, her voice tiny. I'm always here, he said. This old place doesn't clean itself. He helped her gather her sheet music, his movements gentle and expeditious. Vivienne quickly retreated, dissolving into the shadows of the unlit corridor as the janitor pushed his large yellow cleaning cart out of a nearby supply closet. He walked with Ara to the main entryway of the music wing, waiting with her until Vivienne's assistant, a young, perpetually nervous woman named Claire, arrived to escort her. She's all set, ma'am, the janitor said to Claire, his tone respectful but reserved. He didn't look at Era with pity or sentimentality. He looked at her like she was simply a kid who enjoyed playing the piano. As they walked away, Vivienne heard her daughter's voice, clear and sure, say, "Vaza, good night, Mr. Fallendife." He smiled. Good night, Era. Vivienne remained in the shadows until he had vanished down the opposite hall with his cart, the squeak of its wheels slowly fading into silence. She walked back to the conference suite, her mind a maelstrom. See Fallon. His name was Fallon. She sat at the head of the massive mahogany table, the dozen empty chairs like silent accusers. Her multi-million-dollar acquisition proposal lay on the tablet in front of her, its complex figures and projections suddenly irrelevant. All she could see was the image of a janitor in a gray uniform sitting beside her blind daughter, teaching her how to hear the other's color of rain. And for the first time in a very long time, Vivienne Shaw felt a terrifying loss of control. She had to know who this man was, not just his name. She had to know everything. The drive home was mute. Era sat in the back of the sleek black sedan, her small form barely making an indentation on the expensive leather seat. She was quiet, but it was a different quiet than usual. Not the tense, brittle silence Vivienne was accustomed to, but something softer, more reflective. Vivienne glanced at her daughter in the rear view mirror, her mind replaying the scene from the music room. Did you have a good practice session, Era? Vivienne asked, her voice carefully impartial. It was fine, Era replied. The standard unresponsive answer. Mrs. Gable said you were making excellent progress on the back partita. A slight pause. Yes, it's very structured. Vivienne waited, hoping for more, hoping for a mention of a kindly janitor, of songs that sounded like rain. Nothing came. The wall between them was back in place, as solid and unyielding as ever. Era was keeping him a secret. The realization sent a complicated chill through Vivienne. It wasn't just a simple act of kindness she had witnessed. It was Oz conspiracy, a tiny insurrection plotted in whispers over the keys of a piano. The next morning, Vivienne was in her office on the 50th floor of the Nexus Tower before the sun had fully ascended over the city. She didn't look at the panoramic view. Her focus was on a single encrypted email she was typing. The recipient was Gers Donovan, the discreet and unnervingly efficient head of her corporate security team. Donovan. The message read, I require a comprehensive dossier on a staff member at Harrington Academy. Name is Ray Fallon. He's on the custodial team. Frame it as a routine security audit for all non-faculty personnel. I want to know absolutely everything. Employment history, education, family, financials. Everything. I need the preliminary findings by end of day. She hit send. The click of the key reverberating in the vast, silent office. It was an abuse of power, a farce breach of privacy, and she felt not a arse trace of remorse. She was a woman who dealt in as metrics, and Ars Ray Fallons was now the most as compelling factor in her existence. Her 1000 meeting was with Marcus Alcott Off, the new headmaster of Harrington Academy. He was a man who seemed as constructed from a catalogue of costly Ivy League accoutrements. Eye flawless as teeth, a watch more valuable than a car, and an ambition so sharp you could almost see it as reflecting off his polished shoes. He greeted Vivienne with a practiced warmth that never quite as reached his gazes. "Vivienne, as privilege," he said, motioning to a chair in his needlessly large office. "Thank you for allocating the time. I know what the CEO of a firm like Nexus Innovate contends with daily. The school is a priority investment, Marcus," she said, paused by passing the pleasantries. "What's on the agenda?" Alcott's smile broadened. "There's Founders Gala. It's in 8 weeks, and this year, I want it to be magnificent. We're courting the Henderson Foundation for a new science wing, and I want to stage an event that reminds them why Harrington is the R's foremost preparatory academy in the state." He slid a glossy brochure across his desk, and to that end I was hoping Sarah would perform. Vivienne looked at him. "She performs at the winter recital every year." "Yes, but this is different. I don't want a simple student presentation. I want a showpiece, the focal point of the evening. We have her listed in the program as a Ars prodigy. I want her to play something that Essex validates it. Something as inspirineth." His pressure was immediate and unwelcome. Alcott wasn't asking as an educator. He was exploiting her daughter as a fundraising instrument. It was a game Vivienne understood, and one she usually played better than anyone. But today, the thought of Ara on a stage, playing a technically flawless but emotionally sterile piece for a room of investors, felt improper. "I'll consult with her tutor," Vivienne said vaguely. "Excellent," Alcott beamed. "We're all relying on her, on you." As she was leaving, a janitor pushed a cleaning cart down the hall. Vivienne's entire body went as rigid air, but it was an older man, stout and gray-haired, not him. The disappointment was sharp and unexpected. Later that afternoon, an alert was coming by on her laptop. It was the preliminary file from Donovan. She opened the encrypted attachment. Subject Fallon Ray, age 42. Status single, widowed. Dependents: one son, Leo Fallon, age 11, attends Northwood Public Middle School. Residence: 23B Orchard Apartments, West District. Employment: custodial staff, Harrington Academy. 5 years prior employment. As Vivienne leaned closer to the screen, this section was almost as blank. It listed a few minor jobs as a warehouse stacker, a short-lived dozen's tenure at a landscaping company. But before that there was a sesgapus, a 5-year cassange in his professional history, and the records from before that gap were heavily censored. There was a single, cryptic note from Donovan's analyst. Ear's subject appears to have a former professional license now inactive. Records are sealed by court order, citing a private family tragedy. A sealed record. A family tragedy. Vivienne's mind raced as. This wasn't some simple man who happened to be kind to her daughter. He was a conundrum. A man actively concealing who he used to be. The mystery intensified and with it, her determination. She looked at her calendar. At the back-to-back meetings and international calls that consumed her life. With a decisive click, she erased her entire evening schedule. She sent a text to her assistant, Claire. "Foss void my dinner engagement and inform Mrs. Gable that Ara will need to stay late for an Isaiah's extended practice session tonight. I'll be working from the annex and will collect her myself." She told herself it was a logical next step in her Azra's inquiry. a CEO gathering was intelligentsia before making a decision. But as she drove toward the school in the late afternoon traffic, she knew it was something more profound. She wasn't just investigating the janitor, she was going back to Vares observe him, to comprehend the secret he shared with her daughter. A secret that was Aisha's conveyed is not in words, but in the spaces between the notes of a sad, beautiful song. The school was a different entity at night. The daytime, as dems of bells, chatter, and running feet, was as superseded by a profound, humming silence. Vivienne sat in the starkly modern conference room, a laptop open in front of her, displaying market analytics she wasn't truly reading. Her entire consciousness was as fixed ears on the building around her, listening for the faint, telltale notes of a piano. Around 9:30 it began a simple, Laga's interrogative melody like a single drop of water in a quiet pool. She moved silently through the deserted hallways, her expensive shoes making no sound on the freshly burnished floors. She didn't stop at the doorway this time. An adjacent classroom used for art history was unlocked. She slipped inside, the darkness providing perfect desire's concealment. From her new vantage point, she had a clear, oblique view into the music room. Tonight, they weren't on the bench. Ray was standing on the wide oak floorboards in her stocking feet. Forget the keys for a minute, he was saying. Music isn't just in your fingers, it's in your feet. It's in your bones. This piece you're working on, it has an oddest heartbeat. Can you feel it? He tapped out a slow, steady rhythm on the polished wood of the piano lid. Es thump, 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 thump. Ara stood perfectly still, her head canted. It's slow, it is, Ray agreed. It's the heartbeat of someone walking, not running. Someone who is contemplating something important. Now walk with it. Feel the his vibration come up from the floor. Vivienne watched as her daughter began to traverses the room, her steps hesitant at first, then falling into perfect synchronization with the rhythm Ray was tapping. He started humming the melody, a low, resonant sound. A small, tentative smile grazed Ara's lips. She was no longer a student practicing an instrument, she was a participant in the music itself. He was giving her a way to perceive the song through sensation. After a few minutes, his phone vibrated in his pocket. He ignored it. It buzzed again. With a quiet apology to Ara, he pulled it out. Hey, buddy, he said, his voice instantly transformed. The quiet instructor was gone, replaced by A's father. The warmth in his tone was so tangible, Vivienne could feel it across the empty space between them. Yeah, I know it's getting late. Just a little longer. Did you finish the history worksheet? Has all of it? Good man. Okay, 20 minutes, I promise. Love you. 2. He slipped the phone back into his pocket, but the law's enchantment was momentarily broken. A life outside these walls had interrupted. A son, a worksheet, a promise. For the first time, Vivienne saw Ray not as a mystery, but as a man dust pulled between two obligations. A man living a life of quiet, wary or sacrifice dedication. He was a single father, just as she was a single mother. The thought was strangely pacifying. He led Ara back to the piano. All right, let's try it again. But this time when you play, remember that heartbeat. Play it with your feet. The difference was astounding. The notes, which had been so sterile and disconnected under Mrs. Gables Dasser's instruction, now possessed a gar's pulsy. They flowed with a grace and emotional gravity that Vivienne had never imagined possible. As the final note receded, Ray needed to retrieve a cloth from his cart in the hallway to wipe down the keys. As he stepped out of the music room, his shadow fell across the art history classroom's open door. Vivienne's heart surged. She instinctively, as Zindra's pressed herself against the wall behind a row of plaster busts, the cold, blank eyes of a Roman emperor staring past her. Ray paused for a second in the hall, listening to the building's silence before continuing to his cart. The wire's close call left Vivienne breathless. her knuckles white where she gripped her phone. She felt the sears rush of adrenaline, the thrill of a secret observer on the verge of being access exposed. The next afternoon, she understood the true price of failure. She sat in on Ara's official lesson with Mrs. Gables, a woman with a conservatory as lineage and the patience of a metronome. They were working on the demanding as audition piece. Alcott wanted for the gala. No, no, Mrs. Gable snapped, her voice sharp. The timing! You're dragging the Allegro. It must be as precisely from the top. Ara's shoulders tensed. She began again, her fingers flying across the keys in a technically perfect, but utterly a solace cascade of notes. Better, Mrs. Gable conceded, though her tone suggested otherwise. But there is no feeling. You are a gifted child, Ara, but you play like an automaton. You must connect with the composer's Sealer's intention. I don't know what he intended, Ara said, her voice barely a whisper. Then you must study, the woman retorted, rapping her pencil on the sheet music. It's all here. The notations, the dynamics. It is a CS formula, not a guessing game. Vivienne watched her daughter recoil on the bench, her face pale, her hands trembling slightly. The joy, the tentative smile Vivienne had seen the night before, was gone, replaced by a familiar mask of as anxious compliance as. The lesson ended with Ara so frustrated she refused us to play another note. That was the moment Vivienne's daughter's objective shifted. This was no longer a passive investigation into a curious scholar's anomaly. It was a other's rescue mission. Her daughter's Gaza's spirit was the prize, and the sterile, the book methods of the world she had built for her were Ra's failings. The janitor, with his talk of heartbeats and rainy day colors, was Faye's succeeding. She couldn't let Alcott's ambition or Mrs. Gable's rigid pedagogy destroy the one's spark of light she had seen in her daughter. She had the data. She had seen the results. Now she needed to act. Driving home, she formulated Adha's plan. A direct confrontation was too risky. He could deny everything, and she would expose herself as a spy. An anonymous tip to the headmaster was out of the question. Alcott would fire him immediately for crossing a line with a student. No, the approach had to be her own. It had to be as controlled, as precise as, and executed on her terms. She would create an encounter, an accidental discovery. She would find a way to make him as play. Then, and only then, would she have the leverages she needed. The plan required precision, timing, and a touch of theatricality. Three things Vivienne excelled at. She arrived at Harrington the following evening, an hour earlier than usual, there's in tow. Ray's shift didn't officially start until 7, but she knew he often came in early to gather's prep his supplies. I have a series of calls with our Tokyo office I can't reschedule, Vivienne announced to Ara, her voice a carefully crafted mix of apology and authority. I'm going to have to take them from here. You can get a head start on your practice. She settled not in the annex, but in a small office directly across from the music room, leaving the door open. She needed to be a visible, plausible presence. Ara sat up at the piano with her Braille music and, more importantly, the printed score for Mrs. Gable, which she placed precariously on the edge of the piano lid. Next to it, she set down a bottle of mineral water. For an hour, Vivienne pretended to work, her ears straining for the telltale squeak of a custodial cart. Ara practiced the notes of the Liszt piece, sounding as strained and unhappy as she felt. At 70:10, Vivienne heard him. The rhythmic, gentle hour thump of his cart approaching down the main corridor. It was time. She stood up, walked into the music room, and began the performance. Ara, sweetheart, could you just move this for me? She asked, gesturing toward the printed music. As Ara reached for it, Vivienne, with the calculated clumsiness as of a stage magician, knocked the water bottle. It says topple over a clear, silent stream of water soaking the expensive, cream-colored paper. Oh, Vivienne gasped, her voice sharp with 5-8 alarm. Oh, goodness, I am so sorry, she snatched up the dripping pages. The ink was already smearing. The thick paper had warpened. It's ruined, completely ruined. Gable is going to be Farah's face. Face fell. We can dry it. No. Look, the notes are running together. It's unreadable. Vivienne made a show of a dabbing at the pages with a tissue, only making it worse. It was in the middle of this as-manufactured crisis that Ray Fallon appeared in the open doorway. "Is everything all right, Miss Shaw?" he asked, his eyes taking in the scene. Vivienne looked up, letting a flicker of desperate frustration show. "Mr. Fallon, no, not really. I've had an accident. I've destroyed my daughter's sheet music for the Founders Gala." She held up the soggy pages as evidence. "Her tutor will be as livid as." Ray nodded, his expression polite but free and passive. "I'm sorry to hear that. Perhaps the office has another copy." This was the master copy Mrs. Gable was working from. Vivienne lied smoothly. "And I can't read music myself to help her. Not a single note." She let out a frustrated sigh, then paused, looking at Ray as if a wild, improbable idea had just struck her. "You're here every night." She began, her tone shifting, becoming more Sellers intimates, more as connivings. "You must hear the students playing constantly. I know this is Edge's long shot, but do you know this piece at all?" Ray's posture stiffened. A guarded, shuttered look came over his face. "Ma'am, I just cleaned the floors. I wouldn't know anything about that." "Of course not," Vivienne said quickly, appearing to back downs. "It was a silly thought." She turned back to Era, whose face was a mask of theirs disappointment. "I suppose we'll just have to pack it in for tonight." The silence that followed was ears heavy. Vivienne knew this was the critical moment. She had to apply precisely the right amount of pressure. It was Era who unknowingly sealed the trap. "Please, Mr. Fallon," she asked, her small voice cutting through the tension. "Mrs. Gable said I have to get the beginning right. It sounds like a storm." Ray looked at Era, and for the first time Vivienne saw the professional mask auswaver of the janitor crack. He saw a child's distress, and his instinct to help was stronger than his instinct to hide. He glanced at Vivienne, then back at the piano, his expression a Zero's battlefield of conflicting emotions. "I might know a few bars," he mumbled, the words sounding like they were being extracted from him, from hearing the kids play. "You would." Vivienne pressed, her voice soft but firm, just to get her started. "It would be an immense help." He hesitated for a long, agonizing moment. Then, with a sigh that seemed to carry the air's weight of years, he walked to the piano. He didn't sit on the bench, he stood, leaning over the keys. He slowly flexed his right hand, a gesture so quick Vivienne almost missed it. A ghost of a long, dead pain. He placed his hands on the keys. The first few notes were clumsy, uncertain. He was playing the part of a janitor who'd picked up a tune by ear. Then his eyes closed. Yes, the pretense fell away. Yes, as his fingers, which Vivienne had only seen holding a mop handle or a wrench, began to move with a fluid, startling grace. The music that poured from the piano was not just the melody. It was the storm. He played with a power and a passion that vibrated through the floor. It was a performance filled with a fierce, aching beauty, a story of loss and longing told in a cascade of brilliant, angry notes. He was no longer in the room. He was somewhere else entirely, lost in a memory that was both beautiful and agonizing. He played for nearly a minute before he seemed to reawaken. He stopped abruptly, his hands hovering over the keys as the final thunderous chord echoed into silence. He stared at his own fingers as if they were traitors. Then he slowly looked up at Vivienne. The janitor was gone. In his place was a man who had been caught exposed of his deepest secret laid bare under the harsh fluorescent lights of the music room. His face was pale, his eyes wide with a look of pure sex panics. Vivienne met his gaze. She manufactured a look of astonishment, of breathless surprise, But inside, a cold, sharp thrill of S's victory shot through her. The variable was solved. The puzzle was unlocked. She had him. The silence in the room was a living thing, stretched taut between the janitor's panic and the CEO's calculated surprise. Ray snatched his hands back from the piano keys as if they were dollars a red hot. His face ashen, he took a half step back, physically retreating into the persona he had so carefully constructed. I have to get back to my duties. Miss Shaw, he stammered, his voice tight. He wouldn't look at her, his gaze fixed on the floor. The West Wing still needs to be cleaned. Or Mr. Doe. Fallon, Vivienne said, her voice dropping the feigned astonishment and picking up a sharp Utcher's executive edges. Let's not be ridiculous. That was not the performance of a man who knows a few bars. Hawes, you're not just a janitor, are you? That's exactly what I am. He insisted, his words clipped. He grabbed the handle of his cleaning cart, his knuckles white. It was an Anna's anchor, a physical reminder of who he was supposed to be now. I'm the janitor. I was out of line. It won't happen again. He tried to leave, but Vivienne moved, dollars blocking his path. She was shorter than him, but her presence seemed to fill the doorway. I don't care about your story, Mr. Fallon. Has not yet, she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. But I know what I just heard, and I know what my daughter needs. She doesn't need another technician like Mrs. Gable, drilling the joy out of her. She needs a Darce teacher, someone who understands that music is more than black dots on a page. She needs you. He flinched as if she had struck him. No. I will pay you, of course, Vivienne continued, ignoring his refusal. She named a figure, an as astronomical sum for a few weeks of tutoring, more than he likely made in a year. Cash off the books. No one needs to know. You can continue your duties. Just meet with her for an hour each night. Prepare her for the Gala des Ex. Ray finally met her eyes, and what she saw there was not greed or temptation, but a deep, unyielding Daos pain. Miss Shaw, you don't understand. I can't. I don't do that anymore. His voice was low, ragged with an emotion she couldn't yet parse. The answer is no. Please let me get back to my work. His refusal was Daos absoluta. It wasn't a negotiation tactic, it was Aya's brick wall. For the first time that evening, Vivienne felt her control slip. See, money, her most reliable tool, had failed. He turned and pushed his cart down the hall. The squeak of the wheels, a sound of defiant retreat. The next afternoon, Ray was focused on his real job, being a father. He sat on a worn park bench watching his son, Leo, kick a soccer ball against a brick wall. Leo was a good kid, bright, a bit quiet, with his father's thoughtful eyes. But for the past few weeks, a shadow had been hanging over him. Something on your mind, buddy? Ray asked when Leo finally flopped onto the bench beside him, breathing hard. Leo shrugged, picking at a loose thread on his jeans. It's nothing. Doesn't look like nothing. Ray pressed gently. Trouble at school? Leo was silent for a long moment. Some of the guys. They're just a jerk so. What guys? Liam and his friends, Leo mumbled. His dad is on the board of some big company. He goes to that school where you work sometimes. Ray felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He knew who Liam was. He'd seen him at Harrington, a boy who walked the halls with the casual arrogance of inherited wealth. What are they doing, Leo? Leo finally looked up, his eyes shimmering. They say stuff about you. His voice cracked. They say you clean toilets for rich kids. They call you the mop man. Daz Liam told everyone my dad was his servant. The words hit Ray harder than any physical blow. The shame, the anonymity he had sought out, had failed to shield the one person he was trying to protect. He had chosen for himself was never supposed to spill over onto his son. He had quit his former life to shield his family from pain, only to find it had followed them in a new, uglier form. He pulled his son into a hug, his heart grieving. What they say doesn't matter, Leo. You know that. I know, Leo whispered into his father's shoulder. but it's hard when they say it every day. Meanwhile, Vivienne was Therial's pivoting. Her first strategy had failed, but failure was just a Uller's data point that demanded a new approach. She placed another call to Donovan. The preliminary report on Fallon isn't enough, she said, her voice sharp. The sealed record. Zekir, I need to know what's in it. I don't care what it takes or what it costs. Find a way. That could have legal ramifications. Miss Shaw, Donovan's calm voice replied through the speaker. That's what I pay you to manage, if, she retorted. But she knew that might take time. She needed a more immediate a form of leverage. He had refused money. What, then, was his currency? Her mind went back to the phone call she'd overheard, the warmth in his voice. Love you, too. His son, Donovan, she said, her mind already assembling the pieces. His son, Leo. What can you tell me about him? He's 11, attends Northwood Public, gets good grades. Seems like a normal kid. Dig deeper, Vivienne commanded. Friends, social life, any problems he's having. I want to know what this man's heir's weak spot is. Every fortress has a gate is. I want you to find it. As she hung up, she felt a line being crossed. This was no longer about her daughter's piano lessons. It was a strategic campaign, and she was targeting a man's child to get to the father. A part of her, small and distant, recoiled at the thought, but the image of Ara's face, frustrated and miserable at her lesson with Mrs. Gable, pushed it away. This was a zero-sum game. For her daughter to win, Ray Fallon had to yielders. She would find his gate and she would break it down. 2 days later, the gate was found. The report from Donovan was waiting in Vivienne's inbox, a model of Fowler's sterile efficiency. It detailed the bullying at Northwood Public with cold, acres dispassionate facts naming Liam Alastair as the ringleader. But it was the final section of the report that made Vivienne's breath catch. Successors. Note subject Leo Fallon has demonstrated considerable artistic talent. He was a finalist in last year's citywide youth art competition. Northwood has a highly competitive theater program, the Rising Stars Academy, offering full scholarships for gifted students in arts and music. The application deadline for this year's intake was last Friday. The Fallon boy did not apply. It was the key. A future for his son that was just out of reach. Vivienne closed the file. The strategy was no longer theoretical. She now had the weapon and the ammunition. She found Rise that evening in the sublevel of the academy, a cavernous concrete space that housed the school's heating and ventilation systems. The rhythmic thrum of the machinery provided a low, intimidating hum. He was replacing a filter on a large air handling unit, his back to her. He didn't hear her approach. Mr. Fallon, she said. Her voice, cutting through the mechanical noise, made him startle, dropping his wrench with a loud clatter. He turned, his face immediately guarded when he saw her. Miss Shaw, you shouldn't be down here. It's not safe. We need to talk, she said, ignoring his warning. She didn't wait for his permission. She simply began. I know about what's happening at your son's school. I know about the bullying, about Liam Alastair and his friends. The color drained from Ray's face. It was one thing for his son to confess to him in the privacy of a park. It was another for this powerful, intrusive woman to speak of it here in the bowels of the school, like it was a line item on a business report. It was his violation. That is none of your concern, he said, his voice a low's growl. I'm making it my concern, Vivienne countered, stepping closer. I know about the Rising Stars Academy at Northwood. A full scholarship for your son. A chance to be in an environment where he'll be celebrated, not ridiculed. A chance to get away from boys like Liam. I imagine that's something you want for him. Ray's jaw was clenched so tight a muscle was jumping. The deadline has passed. Deadlines are for people who don't have my phone number, Vivienne said coolly. The head of the admissions board, Robert Carlisle, sits on the advisory council for one of my company's philanthropic ventures. A single phone call from me, And the deadline for Leo is no longer an issue. Another call, and I can have a private art tutor, the best in the city, at your apartment tomorrow to help him build a portfolio that will guarantee his acceptance. I can give him this Rayach. She used his first name. It was a deliberate move, an act of forced intimacy, of ownership. He stared at her, his expression a storm of fury and dawning, helpless as her horror. He saw the trap before she had even finished setting it. "And what do you want?" he asked, his voice rough. Here it was. "The price." "You know what I want," she said, her voice dropping, becoming as sharp and cold as a vase shard of glass. "Das, you will teach my daughter das. You will meet her 3 times a week and prepare her for the Founders Gala. You will unlock whatever it is you do that makes her play. And you will ensure she gives a performance that Marcus Alcott can only dream of. Yes, you will not breathe a word of this arrangement to a soul. You will be a janitor to the world, and you will be her teacher in secret, docs." She paused, letting the weight of the offer settle in the humming mechanical air. "Tss. You give me what I want for my daughter, and I will give your son the future you can't afford." It was a devastating choice. A brutal, soul-crushing transaction. Everything in him screamed to tell her to go to hell, to throw her offer back in her impossibly arrogant face. The thought of sitting at that piano again, of willingly walking back into the world that had shattered him, was physically nauseating. But then the image of Leo's face streaked with tears in the park flashed in his mind. They call you the mop man. He was being asked to trade his own personal hell for his son's happiness. It was no choice at all. A father's love was a currency more powerful than any dollar figure she could have named. He looked at this woman, at her perfect suit, her unwavering gaze, and he felt a profound, bottomless hatred. But he also felt beaten. She had found his gate and she had, as promised, broken it down. "Fine," he said, the word tasting like a sash in his mouth. He felt something inside him break, but he did it trust for Leo. "I knew you'd be reasonable," Vivian said, a flicker of triumph in her eyes. "Quarfe truce, a confession and the storm, but we do this my way." Ray added, his voice gaining a hard, defiant edge. He was trying to claw back a shred of dignity. "No talk of technique, no schedules from Mrs. Gable. I teach Ara how I have teach her. Those are the terms." Vivian considered it for a moment, then gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Agreed. The deal was struck, a dark pact made in the thrumming heart of the academy. Vivian turned to leave, her mission accomplished. But as she walked away, the look in Ray's eyes, a look of pure, agonizing sacrifices, lingered in her mind. She had won. She had gotten exactly what she wanted. So why did her victory feel so much like Aya's loss? The first lesson under their new arrangement was Aya's ghost stars of what it had been. The warmth was gone, replaced by a strained, chilling formality. Ray was punctual, efficient, and as distant he spoke only when necessary, his instructions precise, but devoid of the stories and colors that had once filled the room. He was a machine executing a program, and the music they made was as hollow as the pact that bound them. Ara felt the shift immediately. She sat at the piano, her hands hovering uncertainly over the keys. "You're sad, Mr. Fallandar," she said, not as a question but as a statement of fact. Ray, who was standing by the window with his arms crossed, didn't turn. "I'm fine, Ara. We're here to work. Let's begin with the opening bars." "But you said music is a feeling," she persisted, her brow furrowed. "If you feel sad, the music will be sad. Sometimes life requires us to perform a task regardless of how we feel," he said, his voice flat. "There's secresa, that is a lesson you will have to learn. Now play." From her observation post in the darkened art history room, Vivian watched the exchange, a knot tightening in her stomach. This was her doing. She had mistaken a delicate, organic process for a simple transaction. She had paid for a service, and now she was receiving it. But in doing so, she had killed the very magicy she had sought to possess. True to her word, she had made the calls. Leo Fallon's application to the Rising Stars Academy was now pending review, and a renowned art instructor had been dispatched to his apartment for private portfolio sessions, all funded by a discreet Nexus Innovate educational grant. Vivienne had fulfilled her side of the bargain. Yet, she kept returning to the school at night, compelled to watch. She told herself she was monitoring her investment, but the truth was more complicated. At Shredazezer, she was watching the consequences of her actions unfold. 2 days later, the final piece of the puzzle arrived. Donovan's email was marked with the highest level of security classification. The subject line contained a single word: others, Falcone. As Vivienne opened the file, Heirs subject Reese Fallon, formerly Ricardo Falcones. The screen lit up with a ghost, a black and white photo of a young man in a tuxedo, his hair dark and wild, his eyes burning with an intense, joyful fire. He was sitting at a grand piano on a concert stage, his hands a blur of motion. Below the photo were press clippings from a decade ago. Faye Falcone's Rachmaninoff stuns Carnegie Hall, a virtuoso for the ages, the boy from nowhere with magic in his hands. Ray Fallon wasn't just a former pianist. He was a Ricardo Falcone, a child prodigy who had exploded onto the international classical music scene. A sensation. Vivienne scrolled down, her heart beginning to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against her ribs. She read about his meteoric rise, his sold-out tours, his marriage to a promising young cellist named Elena. And then she reached the final entry. A police report heavily redacted, but the core facts were there, cold and brutal. A date from 9 years ago. A single-car accident on a rain-slicked highway outside of Philadelphia. Azzy Elena Falcone pronounced dead at the scene. Ricardo Falcone, the driver, extracted from the wreckage with multiple injuries, the most severe being a compound fracture and catastrophic nerve damage to his right hand. His career was over. His wife was gone. The file noted that in the aftermath, pursued by the media, he had petitioned the court to have his and his young son's records sealed. He had legally changed his name, shedding the skin of the brilliant, broken prodigy to become a ghost, a janitor, a man hiding from a life so filled with light that its absence had left him in Dare's permanent darkness. Vivienne leaned back, the air leaving her lungs in a rush. Cesar, the piano, wasn't just a painful memory. It was a tombstone. It was the instrument of his glory and the catalyst for his ruin. His wife had been driving home with him from a concert that night, and Vivienne, in her blind, selfish ambition, had taken a crowbar to that tombstone and pried it open, forcing him to look at the body inside. A wave of profound, sickening guilt washed over her. The ruthless CEO, the woman who prided herself on seeing every angle, had been completely, utterly Adler's blind. That night she watched the lesson with Wa's new eyes. She saw the subtle way he favored his left hand. She saw the flicker of deep, unbearable pain in his eyes when Ara played a particularly beautiful, soaring passage. She saw a man performing an act of Wa's excruciating emotional sacrifice, and he was doing it for his son. But despite the tension, something was beginning to shift. Ray, bound by his promise, was finding a way to teach through his own pain. "That part you're playing," he said to Ara, his voice low. "It's a battle, to two forces pushing against each other. Can you hear it? The loud part and the soft part." "Exactly." He nodded. Don't just play them. Become them. Gas make your left hand the storm, and your right hand the ship trying to sail through it. Let them fight." Ara tried again, and this time the music had a pulse. It was conflicted, dynamic, and breathtakingly alive. For the first time, a flicker of the old Ray, the teacher, the storyteller, broke through the surface. Vivienne stood in the dark, her hand pressed against her mouth. She had what she wanted. Ara was learning. The gala would be a success, but the victory was hollow, tainted by the knowledge of the price he was paying. She closed her eyes. The handsome, Haunted face of S. Ricardo Falconi burned into her mind. She had started this as a negotiation. Gas, it had now become a question of absolution, and she had no idea how to earn it. Guilt was an inefficient emotion. It produced no quantifiable results and consumed valuable mental energy. Vivienne had spent her entire career systematically eliminating it from her decision-making process. Yet now it was a constant, leaden weight in her chest. The knowledge of who Ray Fallon used to be, and what she had forced him to become again, had changed the entire equation. She could no longer be a spy in the shadows. A few nights later, she found him on his dinner break. He wasn't in the staff lounge. He was sitting on a cold stone bench in the academy's deserted inner courtyard, eating a sandwich from a brown paper bag under the weak glow of a single security light. He looked tired, the lines around his eyes deeper than she'd noticed before. She approached him silently, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. She held one out to him. "I thought you might need this," she said. He looked up, startled, his face immediately defaulting to a look of wary suspicion. He didn't take the cup. "What do you want now, Miss Shaw?" "Or nothing, Oaz," she said, her voice softer than she intended. "I'm not here to check on my investment. Secom, I'm here to apologize, Doc's." The word hung in the cold night air between them. An apology from Vivienne Shaw was as rare and improbable as a snowstorm in July. He stared at her as if she'd just started speaking a foreign language. "I was wrong," she continued, forcing the words out. They felt awkward, ill-fitting. "The way I handled this. Forcing your hand, using your son. It was a ruthless thing to do. I saw something I wanted for Era, and I convinced myself that the ends justified the means. If they didn't, Oz." She placed the coffee on the bench beside him. "I can't undo it, but I can say that I am sorry for the position I put you in." Ray watched her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. He had expected threats, new demands, a tightening of the screws. He had not expected this. He had not expected a confession. Vivienne looked away from his searching gaze toward the dark, imposing silhouette of the academy. "When my husband left, the first thing I noticed was the silence. It was deafening. I think I've been trying to fill it ever since. With work, with schedules, with lessons for Era." She gave a short, bitter laugh. "I thought if I could just make her perfect, make her playing perfect, it would fix the quiet. I've been trying to fix her when I was the one who was broken, Diaz." It was the most vulnerable, honest thing she had said to another human being in years. She was sharing a piece of her own story, not as a tactic, but as AAR's peace offering. Ray was silent for a long time. He finally picked up the coffee cup, his fingers wrapping around its warmth. She's a good kid," he said, his voice quiet. She just needed someone to listen to the music she was already making inside. He didn't forgive her. He didn't absolve her. But he had, for the first time, engaged with her as an equal, as another parent trying to navigate the messy, painful business of raising a child alone. A tiny crack had appeared in the wall between them. The lessons began to change. With the weight of Vivienne's apology, however small, lifting a fraction of the bitterness from his heart, Ray found it easier to access the part of himself that was a teacher. He and Era started crafting a story for the list piece. It was about Ayer's lost bird in a storm, fighting the wind and the rain, searching for its home. The loud, angry passages were the thunder. The fast, frantic sections were the beating of its wings, and the soft, melodic ending. That was the moment it saw the sun break through the clouds. Era's playing transformed. It was no longer a technical exercise. It was an as-epic tale. Marcus Alcott, however, was not impressed. He caught Vivienne in the hallway a week before the gala, having just overheard Era's practice. "Vivienne, a word," he said, his smile tight. "I just heard Era. The piece is sounding rather dramatic, isn't it? Almost yesers undisciplined. I trust Mrs. Gable is reining that in. We need precision and control for the gala, not melodrama." The old Vivienne would have agreed, would have promised to tighten the reins. The new Vivienne stiffened. "I think it's brilliant, Marcus," she said, her tone leaving no room for debate. "Shots, it's passionate. It's exactly what the performance needs. Das." She walked away, leaving him momentarily speechless. She had chosen a side later that day. She made a call to Donovan, the art tutor for Leo Fallon. Cancel the arrangement. Docs, Miss Shaw, the portfolio is nearly complete. See us, cancel it, she repeated. And the application to Rising Stars, withdraw it. Das. There was a pause. May I ask why? Because it was a bribe, Vivienne said quietly. And I'm finished with that. Shucks. Instead, she made a different call. She arranged an anonymous donation to Northwood Public's underfunded arts program, enough to hire a new teacher and buy supplies for 2 years. And she had Donovan track down a small, community-run art co-op in Ray's neighborhood, a place known for its nurturing atmosphere. She sponsored 3 months of classes for a promising young artist, leaving the name blank to be filled by the co-op's director. It was an act of Vihar's atonement, an attempt to give back without taking, to fix what she had broken in a way that wasn't a transaction. It was a quiet, anonymous apology sent out into the world with no expectation of being heard. The night of the Yuz Founders Gala arrived, cloaking the academy in a glittering facade of valet lights and evening gowns. The air buzzed with money and influence. Inside, Vivienne moved through the crowds, accepting compliments and nodding to people whose names she barely registered. She was a flawless picture of corporate grace, but inside her stomach was a tight knot of anxiety. The final lesson had taken place the night before. After Ara was picked up by her assistant, Vivienne had found Ray in the empty music room. He was standing by the piano, not touching it, just looking at it, his expression distant and unreadable. The truce between them was fragile, and Vivienne knew it couldn't hold the weight of the secret she was carrying. She had to confess. "I had my team look into your past," she said, the words blunt, stripped of any corporate doublespeak. "After you refused my first offer. I know who you are, Ricardo Gas." His name, his real name, dropped into the silent room like a stone. He went rigid, his back to her, and for a long moment, he didn't move. She thought he might just walk out. "I know what happened," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "To your wife, to your hand, and I need you to know I am not just sorry for forcing you to do this. Sir, I am so deeply sorry for your loss, for everything you lost, Oz." He finally turned, and his eyes were not filled with the anger she expected, but with a profound soul, deep wariness. He looked at the sheet music for the Liszt piece still sitting on the piano. "She loved this piece he said, his voice thick with memory. "Elena, she always said it sounded like my playing. All thunder and stubbornness until the very end." He gave a sad, faint smile. "She said the ending was the part I hadn't learned to live yet." It was an offering, a small, precious piece of his story given freely. In that moment, the CEO and the janitor ceased to exist. They were just two people, a man and a woman, who understood the shape of grief, the sound of a life that had been irrevocably fractured. Now backstage, the carefully constructed piece of the past few weeks was threatening to shatter. Ara sat on a stool in a small dressing room, her velvet dress beautiful, her face pale with stage fright. Marcus Alcott swept in, his smile wide and predatory. "There she is, our little prodigy," he boomed. "Ready to bring the house down, break a leg." He gave her a patronizing pat on the head and swept out again. The gesture, meant to be encouraging, did the opposite. Ara began to tremble. "I can't," she whispered, her hands clenched in her lap. Mom, I can't. There are too many people. I can't feel the story anymore. My hands are cold. Vivienne knelt beside her, her own heart hammering. She smoothed her daughter's dress, trying to project a calm she didn't feel. "Yes, you can, sweetheart. Just remember the story. Remember the bird." "I can't hear it," Ara cried, her voice rising in panic. It's just notes again. S. Just then, a figure appeared in the doorway. It was Ray in his janitor's uniform, holding a dustpan and brush. He looked up as if surprised to see them there. "Sorry," he said, his eyes meeting Vivienne's for a fraction of a second. "Just cleaning up a spill." Alcott, who was hovering nearby, scowled. "This is a private area, Fallon. Get on with it." Ray ignored him. He walked over to Era and knelt, setting the dustpan aside. He gently took her trembling hands in his large, warm ones. "It's okay to be scared, Aras," he said, his voice a low, steady anchor in the chaotic swirl of backstage nerves. The bird was scared in the storm. Remember how we said the thunder made its heart beat fast? That's what you're feeling right now. It's not fear. It's the beginning of the music, das es. Ara's breathing began to slow. "You don't have to be perfect," he continued, his gaze holding hers. "Yes, you just have to be honest. The story is in your hands. It's been there all along. Close your eyes. Don't listen to the people. Listen for the heartbeat. Can you find it?" Era closed her eyes and nodded slowly. A deep breath. Then another. "There it is," Ray whispered. He gave her hands a gentle squeeze and then stood up, picking up his dustpan. He gave Vivienne a single, meaningful look before disappearing back into the corridor. Just another janitor doing his job. A stagehand called Era's name. Vivienne walked with her to the edge of the curtain. "Ciao," she whispered. "I love you too." Era replied, her voice small but steady. She walked out onto the stage, a tiny, solitary figure in a vast pool of light. She found the piano, sat, and placed her fingers on the keys. A hush fell over the auditorium. Vivienne and Ray stood just feet apart in the darkness of the wings, too silent, unseen guardians watching their two worlds collide. Era took a deep breath, and then she began to play. The first notes were not the precise, crystalline sounds Alcott had been expecting. They were low, ominous, and full of a gathering tension. It was the sound of a storm brewing on a distant horizon. The audience, which had been politely expectant, leaned forward as one. This was not going to be a recital. It was going to be a story, but the story Era told was devastatingly beautiful. The piano thundered with the fury of the storm, the notes cascading in a brilliant, chaotic torrent that was less about technical precision and more about pure-ness, untamed power. The audience was holding its breath. This was not the playing of a child prodigy showing off her training. It was the sound of a human heart with all its fear and fight laid bare. Vivienne felt tears streaming down her face, but she didn't bother to wipe them away. As she was watching her daughter fly, the piece shifted. The storm receded, replaced by a passage of such quiet, aching fragility that a collective sigh seemed to move through the auditorium. It was the bird, exhausted, wings heavy, lost but not broken. Then slowly, a new theme emerged, a simple, hopeful melody that grew in strength and warmth until it filled the entire hall. It was the sun. It was home, when the final peaceful chord faded into a perfect, shimmering silence. The room was completely still for a full 5 seconds. Then the applause erupted. It wasn't the polite, measured clapping of a wealthy gala. It was Ayer's roar, a standing, thunderous ovation that felt like a force of nature in itself. People were openly weeping. The head of the Henderson Foundation was on his feet, applauding with a look of stunned reverence on his face. Backstage, Ara practically fell off the bench and ran into the wings, straight into her mother's arms. Vivienne caught her, lifting her off the ground in a hug that was fierce and full of a love she had never known how to show before. "I did it."
"Mom?"
Ara whispered, her face buried in Vivienne's shoulder. "I flew. Sis, you were magnificent." Vivienne sobbed, her voice choked with pride. "You were a storm and a sunrise all at once." Docs. Ray stood a few feet away, a silent observer, his face etched with a complex mix of pride and old sorrow. Ara pulled away from her mother and turned, her hand outstretched into the space between them. "Thank you, Mr. Fallon," she said, her voice clear and strong. Before he could respond, Marcus Alcott bustled over, his face a mask of forced enthusiasm. Marvelous, Ara. Simply marvelous. A bit unorthodox, of course, but the donors seemed to have loved it. He glanced at Ray, his eyes narrowing with suspicion and annoyance. Sizzle Fallon. What are you still doing here? There's a spill in the main lobby. Vivienne straightened up, her arm protectively around her daughter. She looked directly at Alcott, her gaze so cold and sharp it made him flinch. He's with me, she said, her voice quiet but absolute. And his name is Mr. Falcone. You will address him as such, Dawes. The shock on Alcott's face was immensely satisfying. Vivienne then looked at Ray, at the man who had given her daughter back her voice. And her eyes conveyed a universe of gratitude, respect, and a nascent hope she was too afraid to name. He held her gaze, and for the first time, the ghost of Aya's Ricardo Falcon, the artist, the husband, the man full of joy, looked back at her. He gave a slow, small nod. It was enough. A month later, the Harrington Academy's glossy brochure announced the launch of the A. Zelina Falcone program for adapted musical arts, generously endowed by Nexus Innovate. The program's director was a new hire, a quiet, thoughtful man named Ray Fallon. His official bio was brief, stating only that he was a celebrated music educator with a focus on intuitive learning. On the program's first day, Vivienne walked into the old music room. It was no longer a sterile, intimidating space. The lighting was softer, the chairs were arranged in a friendly circle, and the walls were covered in colorful drawings made by the students. Ray, no longer in a janitor's uniform, but in a simple, comfortable blazer, was sitting on the floor with a small group of children, one of whom was in a wheelchair. He was teaching them rhythm by having them tap on small hand drums. In a corner, Leo was sketching in a notebook, a confident, happy smile on his face. He was flourishing in his classes at the Community Art Co-op. Near him, Ara was helping a younger, newly enrolled blind student find middle C on the piano, her hands gently guiding his. Vivienne stood in the doorway, watching. This was the sound that filled the silence now. It wasn't the sound of perfection or precision. It was the slightly chaotic, wonderfully messy and joyful sound of Oz healing. Ray looked up and saw her. He excused himself from the group and walked over, a real, unguarded smile on his face. The ending, Vivienne said softly, her heart full. Say you learned how to live it, X. Turns out it wasn't an ending, he replied, his voice low. Shuts, it was just a quiet part in the middle of the song. Guy who acts. He looked at their children, at the new life humming in the room he had once only cleaned. We're writing the next part now. His hand found hers. His work roughened fingers lacing through her own. It wasn't a dramatic, storybook romance. It was something quieter, deeper, and infinitely more real. A partnership built not on a flawless performance, but on the shared understanding of a beautiful, imperfect, and finally hopeful song.